Our lecturer this afternoon is Dr. Gregory Jusdanis. He's a distinguished arts and humanities professor at Ohio State University. There he teaches comparative literature and modern Greek. He is the author of 6 books. They are The Poetics of Cavafy, Belated Modernity and Aesthetic Culture, The Necessary Nation, Fiction Agonistes, Fiction Agonistes, A Defense of Literature, A Tremendous Thing, Friendship from the Iliad to the Internet, and Konstantin Cavafy, A New Biography. Konstantin Cavafy is this book here, so those who would like to read the book, you can buy the book here, so you don't have to order it through Amazon. He has received fellowships from numerous institutions. He has served as visiting professor at Kwara State University in Nigeria, the University of Buenos Aires, the University of Cartagena, and Universidad del Rosario in Bogotá. He has been invited to give lectures around the United States, Canada, Europe, Latin America, Australia, Africa, and the Near East. His book, Konstantin Cavafy, A New Biography, which is this book here, has received wide press coverage in North America, the UK, and Greece, where it was for 4 weeks on the best-selling charts. It has received the Uranis Prize for Biography by the Athens Academy and has been long-listed for the National Book Critics Circle Award in the United States and the Rachman Prize. Tom, there is an echo here. Is anyone going to do something about it?
I was logging in through this because I wanted to, but we'll try to get that
Okay.
later when there's
Okay,
questions.
so from here, those is going to go okay. Very good.
All right.
Professor Jusdanis.
Thank you everybody much for coming in this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be invited here. First of all, when I lecture, I like to move around, but now I have to stay in front of the camera here. So this year has been, for me, because of the Zoom, has been an extraordinary year. Although, as I said, I'm coming to the end of my career. I've published lots of books. I've never been on a book tour before. And this is the first time I was on a book tour. And there are 3 reasons for this, that this has happened with this book and none of the other books. And that is because I wrote it over a very famous poet. If you ask most people who study poetry of the 20th century, they would put Cavafy as in the top 5 poets of the world. So he has name recognition. It was a biography, that is a life story. So that's much more approachable to a general audience than a regular academic book, like my other books. Like some of the people here, friends and relatives, may have gotten it, but usually not even my children have read my other book. I have 3 children. Nobody has read my books. And then also because it was published by a commercial press here, also in the UK and in Greece, so it had a different promotion. And it culminated much in the beginning to my fear. I got last November an invitation to go to Greece and speak in the Megaron Musikis, which is the concert hall. And I'm like, wow, speaking at the concert hall. And also I felt, okay, I can speak Greek, but could I be able to speak like to 500 people? And why is that? Because in Greece, he's really, really a very, very famous poet. So the book there was a great event. And I should tell you, I was really nervous before appearing in the concert hall. I remember arriving, they said, come early, so we'll show you around the stage. It was the most professional thing that I have seen. And then they said, would you like some coffee? And I'm like, no. I said, my nerves are shattered. I said, could I be somewhere by myself? And they said, sure, you have your own dressing room. I'm like, what? So I was taken to the dressing room, and like the movies, they have like light bulbs around the mirror where people can put on their makeup, a day bed, a shower, a fridge. And she said, you could rest here and I'll come and knock on your door 5 minutes before you appear on the stage. And I said, okay, I tried to rest. I'm pacing around. So I'm pacing. And soon as 5 minutes before she comes, I go there and pretend that I'm racing. Anyway, so all that to show that this was a book like no other. And because it really deals with a story. So a biography is a life story. So think about it. When we introduce each other, we are, in a sense, not only thinking animals, but primarily storytelling animals. That is, when we introduce each other, we don't say, here's my phone number, here's my social security number, this is my address, this is my date of birth, bye. What do we say? We give them a story of ourselves, and that's how we connect with human beings. So a biography then is the life story of a particular person. It could be about a president. It could be about, say, Steve Jobs. It could be about anybody. So we chose to write about this famous poet, Cavafy. So Cavafy was born to a Greek family in Alexandria in Egypt, and they stemmed from Istanbul, Constantinople. They were invited, the family was invited in the 1918, I was never good in dates, 1850s, to help, by the Egyptian government, to help develop the cotton trade. And in fact, Cavafy's father was so instrumental in this that during the American Civil War, when there was an embargo, the northern states prevented the southern states from exporting any cotton to England. The cotton mills in England were able to still keep on running because the Cavafy family was able to jump up production, cotton production in Egypt, and replace all the cotton that was not coming from the United States. So the family, he was born to a very, very wealthy family, one of the most wealthy in the Near East. When the father died, all the brothers were in the arts, like my children, so they were not good in business. So the family business collapsed. And there where Cavafy was born to such an extraordinary family. Come on in. To such an extraordinary family, he lived a life as a small civil servant with only a memory of what existed. So in this biography, we tried to talk about his life story. And unlike most biographies that are written in chronological order, that is, from the time a person is born to the time that they die, we decided to write it thematically. And that is, we write that we have one chapter. The first chapter is devoted, we begin with the funeral. And then we have another chapter on the family, on Alexandria, where he lived and worked all his life, on his friends, on how he became a poet, how he became famous. And the last chapter is his memorial service, how he then was no longer Constantine, but became Cavafy, the poet. So that's why we have written it. And we wrote it in this way, thematically, not chronologically, because his life was really not that exciting. And we felt also, because I was writing this with my colleague, it was easier to separate the chapters into themes rather than I do 0 to 35 and he would do, 35 to the time that he was dead. And also because, of those of you that write will know, we could really, in a sense, work on what's called the narrative arc to make each chapter more interesting, because we would determine the way that narrative work rather than we let biography or the years itself determine them for us. So what I'd like to do then is read about 6 or 7 parts, some segments of the biography to give you a sense of his life. And then I can ask have some time for questions. So we will begin then. I invite you all to come to Alexandria. It's 1933 in Alexandria, Egypt. The great poet Constantine Cavafy is dying. So I will read from that here. So this is from the prologue. So can everybody hear me? Okay, so in April early April of 1933. Alekos and Rika, these were Cavafy's, in a sense, literary heirs, since he had no family left. They took care of him. They decided they had no choice but to transfer the poet to the Greek hospital, which was across the street from his apartment in Alexandria. In these final moments, Rika, that is his literary heir, was exposed to a more humane, vulnerable side of Constantine. Now, it is typical in biographies to refer to a person by their first name rather than by the last name, because there are many Cavafys. So we want to distinguish Constantine from his brothers and uncles, etc. So Constantine, that neither she nor anyone else had previously known, while gathering a few articles of clothing and some papers for the hospital, she pulled down an old valise, an old suitcase. As soon as Constantine laid eyes on the small suitcase, he began to sob. Quote, "We tried to calm him during this heartbreaking moment when he was leaving his house forever. He took his small writing pad and scribbled, because he went to Athens to be operated for throat cancer, and he lost his voice, so he could only then scribble down notes. In the last year of his life, he scribbled, quote, "I bought this valise 30 years ago in haste one evening in order to go on a pleasure trip to Cairo. Then I was healthy, young, and not unattractive." It must not have escaped Rika's notice that Constantine omitted to say old and dying. So this is a reading then from the prologue, which is from his death. Now, I want to read something from the chapter on the family. As I said, his was one of the most rich families of the Near East. Come on in. Here, you can come and sit here in the front or in the back. So his was one of the wealthiest families in the Middle East. He died very poor, but what is worse is his niece. And I want to read you a letter we discovered that nobody else knows. So this is his niece, Heraclea, who was named after his mother, Heraclea Cavafy. And she writes a letter in 1972. She finds herself in Greece on the island of Mytilene, Lesbos, begging for money. She has sold her grandmother's jewelry, all the family heirlooms that she had, and she's begging for money. And this is her father, Aristides, Cavafy's brother, then was brought up to this family. It's a heartrending letter that we discovered for the biography. So here I'm going to read to you from this letter. So she writes to this relative in Alexandria, and she says, "Dear Sir," and it's January 13, 1972. And she introduces herself and she says, "Before continuing on this letter that will undoubtedly surprise you, I must tell you that my mother was Maria Vouros, daughter of George Vouros and Julia Rodokanaki, and my father Aristides Cavafy, the brother of Constantine Cavafy, and I am the last remaining descendant of that family." She was the last one, the last Cavafy. "I must now reveal the exceptional circumstances that I think justify the reason why I'm writing to you, though you do not know me. My purpose is to beseech you to use your influence with the Department of Public Works so that, given these exceptional circumstances, I can be granted a pension that would allow me to live. A few years ago in Athens, at 72 years of age, with a weakened heart, I had to undergo an operation. Having lost, and this, as I said, brings goosebumps to me, my entire fortune, I continue to work as a French and English tutor to make ends meet. But at this point, I'm now 75 years old, my heart condition is worsening, and my physical strength is waning. I don't know where else to turn. And this is the worst part. I sold my jewelry, that is, her grandmother's jewelry, Cavafy's mother's jewelry. So many times I'd like to go with my wife and visit houses of literary people. Like we went once to see Eudora Welty's house down in the house. Wherever we go, if there's an artist or an art writer's house, we go visit. When you visit the Cavafy Museum, given the fact that he died in 1933, there's very little left. It's because all of it was sold. by the remains of the family. And again, had they been poor originally, I could understand that, but they had been one of the richest families in the Near East. In fact, his father was going to be knighted. He was a British subject. He was going to be knighted by Queen Victoria for the help in ramping up the cotton production. Here, his granddaughter, Cavafy's niece, is begging for help. And she says, and all of my family heirlooms, and no longer have close family to whom I can turn. If I hadn't reached this absolute state of debility and weren't truly at the end of my rope, please know that I wouldn't have allowed myself to disturb you. And she says, and she ends the letter, I don't need to tell you that if you can help and intervene judiciously on my behalf, I would be infinitely grateful. You have my sincere best wishes, Heraclea. Valérie, I don't think she got this pension. She died 3 years later, penniless, and she gave her last interview, and this is what she said in the last interview. They asked her, how does it feel being the last Cavafy, being the niece of this great poet? And she said, all these rich memories accompany me from then to today, here to these dire straits. And for me, they constitute true happiness, which is she was left now with her memories. And I sometimes ask myself how she felt being in this state and staying in this very, very poor hotel. So the next chapter deals with the city of Alexandria. And so we have Constantine running around and walking in the city in the way it hasn't been done before. So I was very pleased with the first press reviews that people liked this aspect, that Cavafy here came around. So I want to read part of the chapter that deals with his apartment in Alexandria. And gives us, so we end with this. So it came to the point right at the end of his life where his apartment became a mecca. Anybody who was coming from abroad, Italy, France, anybody, England, the very famous writer E.M. Forster, who, as some of you wrote, Passage to India, would go. Everybody went there because it was a place of pilgrimage. And so we're going to describe here the apartment. No one left the apartment unaffected. So overwhelmed was the Greek poet Myrtiotissa by her encounter with the poet that upon exiting the flat and returning to the grit and clamor of Alexandria, she began to doubt whether she had actually spoken to him. When her companion, Nikozalitis, asked for her impressions, she responded by questioning whether she had indeed beheld the poet, experiencing in the apartment a cognitive dissonance. I'm not sure that I actually saw and heard that man, she said. Are you sure we can see him? As soon as she set foot on Rue Lepsius, which was named after a very famous German Egyptologist, the artistic illusion, because the apartment was something whimsical, people felt when they entered it, they entered this world of art that was totally different from the grit and clamor of the city outside. She felt all this illusion of the apartment dissipated, but as she made her way to the hotel, she sensed, as she said, the poet's eyes following her, in a sense, pursuing her. That's how Constantine looks out at the viewer in the now famous iconic photograph of 1929. He wears a striped dark three-piece suit, a white shirt, a silk tie, a handkerchief in his breast pocket, and he rests his left arm on the sofa, revealing a costly cufflink. Behind him hangs an antique, slightly tattered 19th century Chinese tapestry. The tapestry, along with his silk tie, starched shirt, and finely tailored suit, convey the aura of 19th century aestheticism and things that he had inherited from the time of his great wealth. At the age of 66, comfortably resting on his accomplishments as a poet, Constantine wanted to project a cosmopolitan image of a dapper man about to go to the theater. Yet he also expressed a quiet resistance to the world, a person not open to emotional interaction with others, apart from posing for the photographer, a man who could no longer be influenced at all. His gaze was unconciliatory, his eyes penetrating but inscrutable. So part of the biography then is trying to give insight. What type of person was he? Because the person that people describe at the end was a very cold, calculating man who was charming, who always received people, but who was really close to any emotional interaction with other people. So in the biography, we wanted to determine how is it that somebody became like this? Because when he was younger, he was a very loving, intimate person. We have evidence, and I will read part of the diary he kept for his young friend, Mikes, who died at the age of 22 of yellow typhoid. And so what's interesting is to see this development, how a person changes and becomes the person that I just described to you in the photographer. So what happens? And in his case, there were many deaths in his family. He's lost his parents, all his brothers. He was homosexual, had to come to terms and wrote openly about his homosexuality. The fact that he had to deal with the fall of his financial situation, that there where he belonged to one of the most wealthy and distinguished families of Alexandria, he now had to cope with the shame and embarrassment of being a petty little servant, a petty servant in the British administration of Alexandria. So he had to cope with loss, and at the same time, as I will show, he was incredibly ambitious, and he was a person that sold love for fame, as I will show later on. But here, I want to read to you how he was when he was still young. And he wrote this very touching diary about his friend Mikes, who was dying, as I said, of typhoid fever in his 20s. So let's see how Constantine was when he was younger. So this is from the diary. Beginning in September 15, 1889, and ending September 29, Constantine's diary reveals his growing worry over Mikes's health. After describing a few pleasant outings with Mikes and other friends, he writes that he met Mikes at the stock exchange on Tuesday, September 15, and remarked how bad he looked. Constantine said, take care of himself, and quote, who would have known that this would be the last time he saw both the stock exchange and Alexandria? The family of Mikes's family was very wealthy and lived in a beautiful suburb further down by the sea outside of Alexandria, and they had to take the streetcar there, something that I took when I went to Alexandria to do research. And there was the famous casino there that many of the Europeans and the Greeks would go for an outing. The next day, not knowing about the severity of his condition, Constantine wrote Mikes a few lines. At that time, people communicated with letters, unless they didn't use the phone, and telling him that he would be at the casino in Ramleh. Constantine took the tram to the Raleigh residence, where he witnessed his friend's fever and attempted to persuade him to change doctors. During a visit on Wednesday, he tried to bolster Mikes's spirits by telling him that he had surely exhausted himself during a recent trip to France, but neither he nor Mikes really believed this. Everybody knew he had typhoid fever, and there was no cure. On Thursday, while visiting the casino with his mother and friends, Constantine learned that Mikes had only a couple of hours to live. So he rushed to Mikes's house, quote, not knowing whether we would find him alive. This proved to be a false alarm. Mikes' condition fluctuated during the following week, but on September 27, hearing that his friend was fading away, Constantine begged the doctor to take the next train to the Raleigh house, asking to be kept informed. Not having received a call by 10 in the evening, Constantine went to see the doctor himself, and he was waiting at the train station and walked there to wait for the doctor to return. When the doctor appeared, he looked shaken, telling Constantine in English he is in a very bad state, very bad typhoid state. offering little hope. Constantine. That night, I did not sleep. Despite a brief improvement of his condition, Mikes died on October 1st. His death brought to a close the first intimate friendship of the poet's life and left a traumatic void. So if we're going to ask, how is it that a person changes? How is it a person who, in his young age, writes this very loving and intimate diary, kept a diary of his mother dying? People said that he was very open. How is it that he becomes so closed in, cold, and in a sense, calculating and incapable of engaging in any intimate relationship with others? I think it has to be said it's both then all these experiences that I mentioned beforehand, and then his overriding belief that he wanted to become a great poet so that one day I could come and, in a sense, give a talk here about. So it was, so this study is really a study of ambition. And what is it that one has to do, whether as an artist, live this way, or a business person, or as a politician? What personal sacrifices do you have to make in order to acquire this fame? Because let's face it, of all the poets that were born and worked at that time, very few have a biography devoted to them. But this comes at a great cost. So now, what I want to do is take a break and read you a poem. So why is he famous? He's famous for his poetry. And what he did was that he was writing for, until in his 40s, what we call a very derivative poetry. He was not very original. He was writing poetry that imitated other poets. And had he continued to write this way, he would have remained a footnote in the history of Greek 19th century literature, and I definitely would not, I wouldn't be invited to come here. There would not be no biography. What happened? He did something incredible. He, in his middle age, he discovered that in order to become famous, he really had to abandon the way he was writing in the past and develop a new style and a new type of subject matter. And he did what no other writer that I know could do, and that is he completely abandoned and disowned everything that he had published and written until that age. Something that I could not do as an author. That is to say, okay, everything that I wrote until now is trash, and he called it trash, and I don't want to be associated with it any longer. And it was this self-possession, this belief in his own genius, this belief that the future will recognize him, that I find so interesting to read about. So what I want to do is read about one of his most famous poems, which is called then Ithaca. Some of you may know it. If you go on YouTube, it has, Sean Connery, the actor, is reading, and there are over 2 million hits. This is our own translation here. And Ithaca is a popular poem because it's a poem about a journey. And I'll tell you an anecdote of how popular it is. So I decided in middle age to learn Spanish and teach in Latin America. And so I did a seminar on Cavafy in Buenos Aires and also in the University of Bogota. So it was in Spanish, and I had about 30 people. And it was one of the best seminars I had because I had poets, fiction writers, playwrights. I had undergraduate students, graduate students, about 30 people. And at the end of the first class, I was so tired speaking Spanish for 3 hours that I said, ¿Cómo se llama brain dead in español? Like, how can I say I'm brain dead in Spanish? Like, I can't. A young man approached me, and he said he was interested in the class. And I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm doing an MA in engineering. I said, why are you taking this class? And he said he was from Caracas, Venezuela. So if you think Caracas, Venezuela is in the north of South America, Latin America. And I said, are you Greek? He said, no. Are you descendant from Greek? No. And I said, why are you taking this class? And he said, before he left on this epic journey by bus from Caracas to Buenos Aires, which took him 3 weeks by bus, his father, who was an engineer, had given him a copy of this poem, which I think is astonishing about the reach of this poet. If you think that here he was living in Alexandria, and a father, before his son leaves, understands the departure through Cavafy's poem. And why? Because it's really about the journey. So some of you will know Ithaca is the island where Odysseus is born. So remember, according to Homer, then Odysseus fought for 10 years in the Trojan War. And then it took him how long to come back? 10 years. So in the Odyssey, Odysseus wants to come back as soon as possible to see his wife and son who he's never met because he was so young. Cavafy writes this poem, but he addresses Odysseus in the second person. Now, writing in the second person is unusual. Usually we have in the first person, I feel this, or the third person, he, she, it, they. So the second person is unusual because we don't know, are you addressing the reader? Are you addressing someone else? So Cavafy here is addressing both Odysseus, but addressing you. And so as I tell my students, this is the journey about life. Life is the journey, journey is life, and it's what you make of it. And this is, as I tell my students, you know, who are 18 to 22 all the time, I get older by a year, they're always the same age. This is the one journey you'll have. Make the best of it. So, it's 33. Sorry, I did have it here. I just lost it as I was. Yes. As you set out for Ithaca, pray that the way be long, full of exploration, full of learning. The Laestrygonians, the Cyclopes, furious Poseidon, don't fear them. These were the creatures that tried to keep Odysseus from returning to Ithaca. So Laestrygonians, the Cyclopes, furious Poseidon, don't fear them. You won't encounter them along the way if you keep your mind on higher things, if a fine essence moves your spirit and your body. The Laestrygonians, the Cyclopes, furious Poseidon, you won't encounter them if you don't harbor them inside your soul, if your soul doesn't conjure them before you. Pray that the voyage be long. May you have many summer mornings when with what delight, what joy, you arrive at unexplored ports. Pause at Phoenician trading posts and acquire fine merchandise, mother of pearl, coral, amber, and ebony, heady fragrances as many heady fragrances as you can. Visit many Egyptian cities, learn from their scholars, and learn even more. Keep Ithaca always in your mind. To arrive there is your destination, but don't hasten the journey in the least. It's best that it take many years so that you are old when you land on the island, rich with what you found along the way, not expecting Ithaca to give you wealth. Ithaca offered you the magnificent journey. Without her, you wouldn't have set out. She has nothing else to give you now. And if you find her poor, Ithaca has not deceived you. As wise as you become with such experience, you will have grasped what these Ithacas mean. So there we have Ithacas is in the plural because, as I tell my student, your Ithaca is different from my Ithaca. So what is he doing here? He is addressing everybody. Now, as I said, you can understand this in a way maybe a 19-year-old can because they are so excited and want to march. But as I said, this is the only one you have. There is no other. And what you do with it is your own decision. And I think it was thinking about his own life, thinking about his own experiences, that he could write such a poem. So as I said, for me, this was an opportunity to study ambition and to study genius. I wanted to know what's in the mind of a genius, what's in the mind of someone like Stephen Jobs, or of some politician, or some great entertainer or artist, you know. And what I discovered many times, it was really the daily stuff of existence. And Cavafy, I became so disappointed, kept lists of his, because I thought, a genius, he would always have his mind set on higher things. No, he kept lists of everything. So this next section is devoted to all of you that have lists and to the little genius in your own heart. So let me go to this and see what he did on a daily basis. So this very act of going through catalogs was almost a daily ritual for Constantine. During his entire career, he kept a careful inventory of his poems, the various revisions, emendations, corrections, and lists of the recipients in Egypt and Europe. He also maintained lists of all kinds, of clothes, of his mother's jewelry, of kitchen articles, such as pots and pans, and of household tasks. Between 1908 and 1914, he enumerated the contents of his house. He saved recipes and instructions on how to cook various foods, writing, quote, "the cutlets must be beaten," end of quote. From 87 to 93, he worked on a register of games he enjoyed playing, such as dominoes, roulette, chess, heads or tails, tombola, and bridge. With all the records of wins and losses, I'm like, why are you collecting all of this stuff? Why do you care? And he hoarded everything: old bills, receipts from hotels, and various mementos, such as printed menus. He preserved all the letters he received and often drafts of letters he sent to friends. And he stockpiled not only important documents as you'd expect, but every single thing, like a student going on a first trip to Europe or something. He kept everything. He even made lists of lists. He says, 2-11-11, lists of things are required to take with me on a 2-day excursion. After the death of his mother, he also had to manage the household affairs, as attested by a 2-page summary he wrote of the domestic tasks. And here I summarize. Ahmed, the servant, does the dishes, while Hassan shines the silver. The clock is wound in the direction of the wall. You put 2 spoons of tea in the black teapot. Ahmed puts 3, and it becomes very bitter. The house is cleaned. The house is cleaned thoroughly twice a year, once in the spring and the second time in the winter. An assistant comes to scrub the floor, beat the rugs, and clean the windows. The baker comes at 6:30 or 7 in the morning and leaves a round loaf. For the evening, we get a straight loaf, and if necessary, an additional one. Ahmed knows the various shops in the neighborhood. So all this type of detail, and I'm saying to myself, why? Why keep it? Why be bogged down by this? So remember when I said that, this is really a study of ambition? And I want to read a section from the section of what he had to do, the choices he had to make, so that I can talk here about his life. And I'll read then in this section about his pursuit of fame. Let's see now. And so remember when I said that he, at middle age, later in his 40s, decided to abandon everything that he had written, and he called this the period of emendation. So after the period of emendation, Constantine seems either to have given up on the possibility of love or sacrificed it in his mission to create great literature. In the high-stakes game of poetic glory, he risked it all. Charming, open to conversation, and eager to perform, while emotionally he seemed to many like an empty shell. For this reason, people came to believe that Cavafy, the poet, had no existence outside his writing, his life being his best poem, or that he had turned his life into art. It would be more accurate to say that he did not distinguish between existence and art. Rika, remember, this is his literary heir and the person that took care of him, understood this as well and made an insightful observation. As a young man facing the pressures of life, Constantine turned to pleasure. He decided, to have fun in life. Later, When his work was established and he found his way, he discovered salvation in art. And that is, there where he believed in love in the beginning, his salvation will no longer be love, but would be art. For example, if he had experienced some disappointment as a young age, he could say, as we say, well, I have my family, I have my friends, I have my children. That gives me meaning. He would say, I have my art. And that's a big difference. I have my art, and that's what gives me meaning. And he came to the terms with his personal tragedy by bringing into art the very few happy moments of his life. Many people close to him in Alexandria, or those who had visited him from afar, saw in Constantine that rare being, a genius pursuing perfection no matter what the personal cost. And I think that's what I learned about this, that he wanted to pursue his artistry at whatever cost there was, something that most of us would not be willing to do, to sacrifice so much of what we see as personal happiness. And he certainly did not feel sorry for himself. It is quite possible that he understood his situation as an advantage, realizing that it was impossible to adore one particular individual while striving for fame, for kudos. In his zealous pursuit for, I use two words, arete kleos, that is excellence and fame, he believed that love of one person and love of greatness was incompatible. And I think that last phrase could apply to most famous people, that the love of one person and love of greatness are really incompatible. And here I'm thinking of that very famous line by the French thinker named Rochefoucauld, who said something that I'll never forget. And he says, we often pass from love to ambition, but rarely do we return from ambition to love. I'll repeat that. We often pass from love to ambition, but rarely do we return from ambition to love. And I think that applies to him and to so many other people then who pursue this type of fame. So now, as I said, we come now to the memorial service. And the memorial service is a time where they had the funeral, and then there was another memorial service where people assembled and they did exactly what they spoke about Cavafy. So this is the summing up then of the book and of his life, and I will end with that. A summing up of his, in a sense, accomplishments. Readers around the world are moved by Constantine's notions of beauty exactly as he claimed. He always believed that the future will recognize him, that the future will recognize his genius. And I remember that there was once in some evening, he wrote a note to himself and he said, how is it possible that I am such a genius and people are not celebrating me all over the world? Well, anyway, so Constantine was the man who recklessly risked it all and won, because many people risk it, but very few people win the game of fame. And that's why it's easier to work on one's family relationships, on one's children, rather than to risk this fame over which you have no control. So he risked it all and won. In terse, disciplined verse, he provided readers beyond Alexandria in his own time with situations, characters, and vignettes they would find applicable to their own lives, exactly as his father did in Caracas, Venezuela, who had no connection to Greece, no connection to poetry. From the confines of his whimsical apartment, stuffed with memories of loss, trauma, and deprivation, he foresaw the modern world as an interconnected expanse of ethnic, racial, and national groups. And though he did not live long enough to experience, as he said, a more perfect society where people made like him, that is, gay, homosexual, queer, whatever word you want to use, would act and move freely, he fashioned for generations of marginalized queer people images, words, and ideas of self-representation. Moreover, by looking unsparingly into his family's experience of dispossession, into Hellenism's own history of decline and survival, he created poetry that transcended the limits of Greek, the Greek language, and the Hellenic world. Cavafy the poet lives on through the energy and aesthetic pleasure that others bring and take from his poetry. The man in his slippers, and this is what Rika talked about, Cavafy and Padua, the man in his slippers ventured out of his house a luminary. Thank you very much.
Oh.
We have time for questions, right, Costa? Do you have any questions?
Yes.
Yes, Susan?
So he's in his 40s. He's spent his entire adult life working on derivative poetry. He didn't burn it all, did he?
He didn't burn it all, but I think we're getting the Sacco again.
I'm trying to, yes, sorry about that.
Okay, so he didn't burn it all. He just rejected it. He claimed anything that he published that wasn't by him, but by a cousin. And so
Say that again?
so for example, people
He
said,
was by his
by
cousin.
a cousin, it was written, but he didn't want to be associated with his,
Did
with.
he buy into that lie?
After a while, people really did not know of this existence. He claimed that in 1911, which was the year he published this poem that I read to you, was the year that he reinvented himself. And so very few people had much details about those poems beforehand. He had not burned them as other people had. He just disowned them.
Okay, next question is, if you were to take a course
They really truly are not that good.
Yeah, they're not that good. We're getting this. Poet that he became, and no one would be interested, because I think what we're interested in is, what do you bring something new to the conversation always, like with this new work? And so it's only after doing that that he gained an audience. And I think the other thing that is spectacular, when you think of that, when he wrote, Greek was only spoken by 6 million people, so that he could become famous by what we call a less frequently taught language. So for example, if you're writing today, if you're writing in a major language like like English, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, you have a huge audience. But if you write like Greek, Albanian, Hebrew, you have a tiny audience. So the chances of breaking out and gaining an international audience is much more difficult than if you were to write in Spanish. You write in Spanish, you can address millions and millions and millions of people. So the fact that he wrote in Greek at that time, when it was only spoken by 6 million people, and he has become one of, if you talk to people of the 20th century, namely the top 5, 6 poets, he would be one of them. That I think is a remarkable achievement. And so one of the questions people ask me when I do these presentations is, what do you think about that he wasn't a nice person? And I think, as we say in the US, nothing succeeds like success. It's sad for the people that lived around him, and maybe sad for him. But for us, do we care that he had unhappy relationships?
in terms of his art?
No, no. Do we care like if Musk is a so-and-so? We're only looking at the success. Is he going to get to the moon or not? So that's the thing when you write a biography. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Cavafy was indeed a great poet, very famous and estimated in Alexandria. But in Greece, he was relatively unknown,
Mhm.
and he became, I think, known in Greece after the war, after the World War II, you know. Do you know how did this happen? And
Yes, it's true. So what I should say that he was not, that's the other thing. You're very, very right that he was known in Alexandria and known by certain people, especially foreigners like Ian Forster. Ian Forster is considered one of the top novelists in English, in British literature of the 20th century. They became close friends. Forster went there during the First World War and got to know Cavafy, and he tried to get Cavafy translated in England. So this is a case where someone is more popular abroad than he is in his own country, because Greece was still very conservative in tastes, and it took some time for them to readjust. He was not what we say a nationalist poet, because he lived most of his time in the diaspora. So if you're a member of the diaspora, any diaspora, you're going to look at life differently than from people in the home country, whatever that home country is. The home country will tend to be more nationalist. So they expected their poets to talk about more national themes, and he didn't. He spoke about different things. He never moved to Greece. He didn't want to move to Greece. He always considered himself an Egyptian Greek, whereas many of the Greeks who began to see that the position, so Alexandria, when it was a very cosmopolitan city, it was a major city then for Greeks, Italians, Jews, French people, and they all interacted together in this very, very, very cosmopolitan setting. People spoke different languages. So that appealed to him, because Greece to him felt very provincial, because it was just one language. And in fact, I got a sense of this when I went back. I was once in Alexandria when I was a student, and I went back to do research, and I got in touch with a librarian, and she said, there's going to be a party, and you can see the last remaining aspect of cosmopolitan Alexandria. And there were many people there who all spoke 3 or 4 languages in their 70s and 80s, but that's a disappearing force. All these cosmopolitan cities, whether there's going to be like Thessaloniki, that was, don't forget, until the Second World War, a major Jewish city, Smyrna, Alexandria, Damascus, they were all cosmopolitan, and they've all now returned to their own nationalist roots, in which those people that existed have left, were expelled, or things. So that appealed to him, that sense that there was this mixture. You could go to his house and people would be speaking French, they would be Syrian, there would be all these people there. And he was also interested in antiquity, and this mixture between sort of the Hebraic and the Greek and the Hellenic in ancient Alexandria. So he was interested in these mixtures that were taking place, that he felt nationalism just closed things out. So that's why it took a long time for Greeks to get to know his type of poetry, because they wanted poetry to be written in one particular way, and he was not giving them that poetry that corresponded to the great poetry that they thought they were giving. He could have moved to Athens. Like some of you may know that there is an incredible museum called the Benaki Museum. Those of you the Benaki Museum is one of the best museums in Greece, and it has one of the foremost collections of Islamic art in the world. So Benakis was like Cavafy, they were in Alexandria, but the Benakis understood that the diaspora communities in Egypt were being threatened more and more by Egyptian nationalism, because they felt that all these foreigners had the best position, and they were, in a sense, not treating the Egyptian population properly. So the Benakis moved early, and they established their art collection they bought a house next to the then royal palace, which now has become this museum. Cavafy could have done that, but he decided to stay, because I don't think he could have felt free in a society that had such a strong national identity. He wanted the openness of Alexandria, where he could act more freely. So that's where he refused to go to Greece. Mhm.
But once he was
particular poem that you mentioned is like
To read you another poem.
Short of them.
Yes. I'll read you a short one. How about this? It's called Voices. It's very beautiful and lyrical. Idealized, beloved voices of those who have died or are lost to us, like the dead. Sometimes they speak in our dreams, and our mind hears them in our thoughts. And with their echo for an instant, echoes of the first poetry in our lives come back like music that fades into the distant night.
Thank you.
The mother candles.
The candles, yes. I don't have it here, but if somebody could find candles on their phone, I could read it.
Another question.
I'm sorry. Yes.
How do we know he was a homosexual? Is there evidence? Did he admit it himself? Or?
He didn't have. That was the other thing, is that he was very open about his homosexuality. More open than anybody else. In fact, I mentioned E.M. Forster. E.M. Forster was also homosexual. E.M. Forster kept that hidden. His gay novel called Morris was not published until after Forster died. I think he died in 1972, and the novel was published afterwards. Cavafy was very open. It was not hidden at all. Now, it doesn't mean that he was ostentatious about it, but everybody knew that, and he was very courageous in writing about these topics in a way that people were not. And I can compare with another author. There is a very famous British poet called Wilfred Owen, of World War I poet. He wrote this incredible poem called Dulce decorum est pro patria mori. It is sweet and fitting to die for one's own country, which is taken from a line from the ancient poet Horace, and it's an critique of the war. So Owen was living in London and England, which was more open and cosmopolitan. He was never open about his sexuality. There was Cavafy living in Alexandria that was more conservative, and he spoke courageously. So there is no doubt that he was a homosexual. The question in the biography was what word to use about, because the word homosexuality was not used at that particular time, and he never used it about himself. Do you use gay, which is more modern, queer, which is more modern? Because then we say, if you do this, you are anachronistic. You're bringing, it's like having a latte or something, which was, so that was our challenge, was which word to use for a concept that he didn't describe himself, because in his poetry, he used other words for describing it. In the poems, many can be very open about their the homosexuality. In the beginning, it's not clear, because he exploited the fact of the Greek verb does not need the pronouns. So for example, if you say fevye in Greek, we don't know if it's he leaves, she leaves, or it leaves. It's like in Spanish, anybody knows ama, so ama, you don't know if it's he loves, she loves, it loves. So in the beginning, we don't know what the pronoun is. Who is the subject of the poem? Is it a man or a woman? But after a while, it becomes quite clear that it is a man when he gains more confidence in himself. And I would say that's another aspect that he has become famous more than anybody else in his time, apart from Oscar Wilde. He was very courageous. They were quite open.
Boy in grammar school.
Yeah.
All right. So there's, okay, well, let's go to a question, then I can read candles. Uh-huh.
This is a little off center, but I've read that one of Cavafy's relatives, young woman, was involved with the pre-Raphaelite artists, and that she was often a model for them. So that if you see a beautiful willowy young woman in pre-Raphaelite paintings, you might be seeing Cavafy's relative. Do you know anything about her? And could you say something about the cosmopolitan nature of Cavafy's family? And one quick comment. Some years ago, I went to a destination wedding in Maine, and they read Ithaca.
There you go.
Later that year, I went to a graduation on the opposite side of the country, Stanford. The president of Mexico read Ithaca.
That's a perfect confirmation of what I'm saying. If I'm really, congratulations on knowing this obscure thing, by the way, about the Cavafy. So remember when I said that they were very cosmopolitan?
Yes.
They were part, like all many trading communities, the Cavafy, they had relatives in Istanbul, Constantinople, Livorno. They had people everywhere, and they connected, they relied on these trading networks. Some of the family members were in London, who were very, very, very wealthy, were supporting these artists. And in fact, some of their material is in the Victoria and Albert Museum. They were supporting these pre-Raphaelite artists. Exactly. Actually, you can read the book, and we have a section in the first and on the family that deals exactly with that.
Right.
And the fact that all these people read Ithaca, again, you wonder, how is it possible that this person who lived in Alexandria, cut off relatively in a small city, yes, it was cosmopolitan, but it was not London or Paris or New York, could write poetry that has such a resonance with people. Yeah.
Other than speaking Greek, I assume that those lists were written in Greek.
Greek and English.
Greek and English, that's what I was gonna ask. So therefore, he would also for himself write things in English.
He was, yes, he was very Anglophile. So they were, in a sense, what we call, all these foreigners were called, in a sense, this comprador bourgeoisie. They were there at the behest of the British Empire, in a sense, and they became wealthy, all of these international communities, because they were really supported, in a sense, and made by the British Empire. So therefore, they all knew English, and they all knew French. And in fact, if you look at the diaries of this famous writer named Penelope Velta. She talks about that they really hardly spoke Greek because really high society spoke English and French. They didn't see Greek as like a worthy language amongst themselves. They spoke that, so they all were trilingual. English, French, and Greek, and only knew enough Arabic to speak to the servants. That's why you see their presence was made untenable. These people that lived in Alexandria were not like most of us that have immigrated into the United States, which means we become part of this. They were there, they kept their own passports. So that when Nasser came after the Suez Canal to nationalize the industries, most of them found themselves without Egyptian passports and therefore had no right to stay when their industries were nationalized. The Benakidis understood this. Many understood this. There is, that famous memoir Out of Egypt by a Jewish writer. They were all found in this situation where they didn't have the passports because they felt that the British Empire would help them. Those that did acquire the passports were able to stay. So now if you go to Alexandria, there are very few of the foreigners that are left. I would say there may be a couple of thousands of Greeks that are there. So most of them then are gone because it was a different community, not a community that in a sense integrates itself with, as happened in the United States and Canada and Australia, but they kept to their own societies. There did not marry, say, with Muslims, with Egyptians, and that made their presence very untenable during Nasser's nationalization of the industry, and they lost everything and left.
They were all exposed in 1956.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So the Suez Canal is something like the Straits of, nobody knew about the Straits of Hormuz. Well, the Suez Canal and Straits of Hormuz is something very, 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 very similar. I think, would you like me to read to you candles? Okay, so Susan. So, candles. Days to come stand in front of us like row of lighted candles, golden, warm, and vivid candles. Days gone by fall behind us, a gloomy line of snuffed out candles. The nearest are smoking still, cold, melted, and bent. I don't want to look at them. Their shape saddens me, and it saddens me to remember their original light. I look ahead at my lighted candles. I don't want to turn for fear of seeing, terrified, how quickly the dark line gets longer, how quickly the snuffed out candles proliferate. Thank you very much.
Was he Orthodox?
Yes. He was Orthodox in the way that many Greek Orthodox, that he only went to, he didn't go to church many times, but he always considered himself an Orthodox and had an Orthodox burial, but he wasn't a regular churchgoer.
I was going to ask, did he have any other spiritual beliefs or inclinations?
He often wrote about the Byzantine Empire and the church. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, it's interesting this came up because Kazantzakis, he had become a Latin, a Roman Catholic. And when people say he was excommunicated, yes, he was, by the Vatican, not by the ecumenical patriarch.
Okay.
Well, or to what extent by his contemporaries he was recognized as a big point?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it again because
He was
To what extent he was recognized at his time as a great poet?
I think originally in Alexandria, And gradually, this is an answer to that question, he gained a lot of following of very contemporary young people in Athens, and they really promoted him. And it's hard for us to understand that poetry meant to them what pop culture is for our young people. Like poetry was something they would engage in really a serious struggle. People would be divided. People were supporting Cavafy, other people were supporting Palamas. They would have fights, they would have disagreements in a way we don't really understand, because cultural matters were really important that us, and I can say sadly, and maybe I'm obviously no longer of this time, is something impossible for us to understand how poetry was important to their lives, because it had to do with their own definition. People stopped being friends over poetry. Can you believe it?
Now,
I'm thinking in Russia, it had that role.
It does. It
Yeah,
did.
yeah, where people are passionate about it.
I was reading, it happens in many societies still. I was reading, I forgot his last name, Hisham something. He was from Libya and got the Pulitzer Prize for a memoir about how his father was imprisoned for a long time by the Gaddafi government. The mother and the son escaped. And constantly, we're talking about the 70s and 80s, how it's poetry that is, in a sense, fulfilling their lives, and how poetry, while his father was rotting away in the dungeons of Libya, it was poetry that was sustaining him. It's impossible for us to understand that. How even that's still not only in Russia then, but right now, then in other societies, a poet is really someone important. For us, that's long gone. And I think it's true, unfortunately, and I say this with great sadness, literature is we're in a different time, and it's hard for us to believe that people could be so enthusiastic over poetry, or what we would call serious writing. When the ancient play The Oresteia by Aeschylus, which was written about 472 BCE, was translated into Greek, modern Greek, in 1902-05. There were riots in the street, and 2 people were killed
Over the poem.
over the translation of the play, of the translation in the Mount. And when passages of the Christian Bible were translated, because the Christian Bible was written in Koine, which was called the common language, the language of the Hellenistic Empire, that was translated into Greek. There were riots again. So people can take language and literature seriously in the way that we find it hard to believe. But if you look at, again, at this society in Libya in the 70s and 80s, it's exactly the same thing. Maybe the more advanced we become, the less interested we become in literature. Maybe that's the sign of progress.
now, if Forrester understood that he was a great poet, did Forrester speak Greek?
No.
Or so somebody translated?
Somebody translated, and he asked Cavafy, and he would. So if you've heard of Virginia Woolf's husband owned an important press, a publishing press. So Virginia Woolf is, the greatest women writer in Britain of the 20th century. So he tried to persuade then Virginia Woolf's husband to publish a book of Cavafy's poem. This is early on. So in translation, this is while Cavafy was alive, and you had many of the leading British figures who were interested in him. They recognized him before people in Greece did.
So before he died, he had a very good sense.
He had a great sense that he was winning. Yeah, there was a thing over there.
Well, you pronounce the word Koine, and I never understood what kind of language that was.
Okay, the way that in the academia is, it's Kini in modern Greek, but Koine is the way it's pronounced in academia, because people feel that ancient Greek was pronounced in a different way than modern Greek is.
How do they know?
Because there would be so many of the diphthongs would not be the same, and the way they look at the way Latin was translating Greek, this is what they suppose. So it's not Kini but Koine, which means the common language, which was the language then of the Roman Empire at the time of Christ. Uh-huh.
This is like two little questions. Is there an international association of Cavafy like there is of Lord Byron? And also, is there like a hub somewhere in Europe, like a college or university, that they're very, very staunch Cavafy scholars and fans?
Well, we can say that, like we say, my goddaughter here, her father was the Cavafy chair at the University of Michigan. So does that come close?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Very good, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much. If anybody's interested, I brought a few books here if you are interested in buying them or something.
Oh. I'll search it, but it's worth it. Having you sign this for me.
Hi, how are you?
Hello.